show is being brought to you in part by Magic Financing, featuring Mago the Magician. They can help you get auto financing for anything in business for over 32 years. Magic Financing is dedicated to customer satisfaction. If you've got credit issues, they have the answer. No matter what your profile is, they can help. They work with people who have fair, bad, or just terrible credit, repayment history, as well as people who have no money down. That's right, no money down. We're located at 6385 North Federal Boulevard with a great auto inventory. Give them a call at 303-298-1155. That's Magic Financing. Features Mago the Magician. They're open Monday through Friday until 8 and Saturdays till 7. Check them out. That's Magic Financing. Call them today at 303-298-1155. Tell them you heard about it here at KUHSDenver.com. Also visit us at www.magicfinancing.com.
Good afternoon and welcome to the council, folks. My name is Charlie Pacello. I'm your host, the host of the council, and I'm just so excited about our guest today and the conversation that we're going to have about military in the rear view mirror and talking about suicide prevention and some really important information that we're going to be providing you today as we continue on with this very special Veterans Summit special series that the Council is in partnership with the Trauma Sensitive Awareness Foundation. It is a 10-part series here on KUHS TV radio, and we are dedicating this 10-part special series to our veterans and their loved ones with information, hope, inspiration, and healing. As far as we know, this is a first-of-its-kind summit, and we are exploring cutting-edge treatments and alternative therapies for PTS, TBI, moral injury, sleep disturbance, family conflict, emotional trauma, and so much more. We're talking to mental health experts, veterans, and their advocates, and we are going to provide answers, resources, and solutions to bring all of our warriors home. We are starting the dialogue, and we are going to continue the conversation. We want you to come and enjoy the conversation. Come join in with the conversation and learn more about part 2, which is debuting in November. So this series is going on all the way through September 25th, and we are broadcasting live here on KUHSDenver.com. KUHS, the stream. We are broadcasting live here in the beautiful city of Denver, Colorado. It's a gorgeous day out here in Denver, beautiful mountains, blue skies, and we are broadcasting all across the nation and all around the world. The council is being listened to by people on 6 different continents, so many different, over 40 different countries, and we thank you so much for tuning in every week to listen to the council, for the information, the guests, the incredible speakers that we have on this show to give you the hope and inspiration to uplift your life. And so thank you for trusting us every week to bring you the best that we possibly can. Well, I am very excited to introduce our next guest, and we have an issue. One of the reasons that we decided to do this show and this series was because of the suicide rate that's going on in the military right now, and it's been going on for some time, and it is unfortunately, it's one of those things that is, we have to be able to face it and deal with it and look at it and see it for what it is, so that we can help and reach out to our veterans and their families so that they know that there's people out there who are there to help them, that there are resources available, that there are signs and signals that our loved ones can look at that can help them to notice if their veteran is in need, and to break down the stigma of mental health. And it's not something that we should look at as being weak or as wrong for getting the help that we need, or our veterans that they need. That it's actually a signal that we, by taking care of our mental health, we're looking at getting stronger again. That we would treat, if we got an injury to our arm, we wouldn't hesitate to go to the doctor. But we've got to have that same kind of attitude when we're talking about our mental and emotional and spiritual health, because we are integrated beings. We are, we look on 4 planes of existence: the spiritual plane, the mental plane, the emotional plane, and the physical plane. And when the 3 on the inside are not working so well, it's going to make the outside really hard to navigate. And, suicide, I came close to suicide. And so being able to come back from that, and I didn't know about the resources available to me out there at that time in my life. And so we want to be able to provide that for veterans and their families so that they know where to go to. And one of the people that you can go to is the gentleman that I'm about to introduce to you right now. His name is Dwayne France, and he is the Director of Veteran Services for the Family Care Center, a private mental health clinic here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He is the Executive Director of the Colorado Veteran Health and Wellness Agency, a nonprofit professionally affiliated with the Family Care Center. Upon retiring from the Army after a 22-year career, including 5 combat and operational deployments, France began serving as a clinical mental health counselor in 2014. He is a member of the inaugural class of the George W. Bush Institute Veteran Leadership Program, a program that supports individuals from diverse sectors across the country who are motivated to increase their impact in helping our nation's veterans. In addition to his clinical work, he writes and speaks about veteran mental health in a wide variety of settings. He has presented at national conferences on mental health and wellness in the military population. He has authored 3 books and is the founder and host of Headspace and Timing, a blog and podcast that brings the information from the clinical community to service members, veterans, and their families. He is also the co-host of the Seeking the Military Suicide Solution podcast, highlighting the need for practical solutions to address suicide in the military-affiliated populations. He has written this book called Military in the Rearview Mirror, and I've been reading it. I'm almost done with it. It is fantastic. He speaks from authenticity. He speaks from the heart, that strength and compassion. He gets it, he gets it, he gets it, and he can tell you how to be able to move through these difficulties that all veterans are move through, the questions that we have, the inability to be able to make sense, and how we create chaos, and how to be able to reduce everything. It's right in here. So, Military in the Rearview Mirror. And you can find that at the website is at veteranmentalhealth.com. That's veteranmentalhealth.com. Welcome to the show, to the council, Dwayne.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it.
Well, I would love for us to just get right at it, because I find your work to be incredible and specific to what's going on in the military veteran population. But before we get started into it, I would love for you to share a little bit about your background and why you joined the military.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So, like many of us, I joined the military way back in the last century, right? So, in the early 90s, I was in high school and Gulf War happened, and of course we all saw that on TV. My father, 3 of my uncles were all Vietnam veterans, but they had all served and had gotten out of the military by the time I came along. And so I sort of grew up in the military life, obviously a kid of the 80s, and seeing the Vietnam Memorial come up, seeing the Berlin Wall go down. But really it was sort of senior year of high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was tired of living in my dad's basement, and I tried a semester of college, and that didn't work very well. And so, I said, I'm going to go full time. And so I did. I enlisted. I was in the reserves for about 8 months, and then I decided that I really wanted to do it full time. First tour was in Germany. When I joined, they said, because I was in logistics, they said, you can be a truck driver in Texas, you can be a truck driver in Germany. Which do you want? I said, I can go to Texas anytime. So the first tour of duty was in Germany. With the Bosnia Dayton Peace Accords happened in late 95, so we were there in 96. The first one's on the ground there. And then spent 3 years in the 82nd Airborne Division. Went back to Germany for another 3 years. I was there when 9/11 happened, and then I wanted to try to volunteer again, go to combat, and the Army said, well, if you want to volunteer, here's recruiting duty for you. So the first years of the war I spent in the front office, but then, of course, left that 2005, got here to Fort Carson, and did one of the 15-month tours in Iraq, 2 Afghanistan tours, and finished out my career in the 10th Special Forces Group support element, and then sort of rode a parachute off into the sunset.
Wow, what an amazing career that you've had, and it spans 2 centuries, literally, you began. And I think you and I both started in the military about the same time. Like I started around 1991, and I think you joined around 1992. And when you think back at your military service, what do you think really makes a person a warrior? Do you have to, because you're deployed on 4 combat tours, yes?
Bosnia, they were throwing rocks and we were shooting at us, but really 3 combat tours and 2 operational deployments.
So you deployed and you were in combat. Do you have to be a warrior and do you have to go to combat and deploy to be a warrior? What are the attributes that makes a warrior in your mind?
Obviously, if you think about the literal definition of a warrior, then, certainly you would think about a combat veteran or a soldier, or even going back to ancient Greek and Roman days, right, the Spartans, and that's one area where people think about warriors. But really, warriorship is as much of a mindset. Mm-hmm. So thinking about someone who faces adversity and doesn't quit, or faces adversity and gets through it, right? And so now, and it doesn't cheapen the word, I think, but we talk about people who survive the battle with cancer as warriors. The people that battle invisible injury as warriors, physical pain, chronic pain, right? And so really, again, literally, yes, one has to have been a combat veteran to be a warrior, but also in a much broader sense, just somebody who doesn't give up, somebody who, even though it sucks, even though it hurts, even though the pain is there, that you get through it and you come out the other side.
Well, and I think that's so important, is that it's almost, we all have that, it's like an energy that we have, that we can move forward in that warrior spirit. It's that ability, like you said, to overcome that adversity, that ability to be able to see through things and not to give up, to keep moving forward, to embrace the suck sometimes. Sometimes things are not fun, but we and that's one of the things we learned in the military, was how to keep going in the face of adverse circumstances. And what an interesting turn, Dwayne, that you made, in that you became a mental health professional. When you weren't a mental health professional in the military, so how did you make that shift before or after you retired?
So, it's a great question. It's one that I often get, right? Because a lot of times, if you have veterans who are in the mental health field, they had some type of association with mental health in the military, either as a mental health tech or as a psych doc themselves or something like that. But really for me, as I mentioned, I was in logistics. It was a purpose, it was a job, but it wasn't something that I found fulfilling. What I found fulfilling was leading troops, right? So that platoon sergeant, that first sergeant, right? That really caring for people. And so in some sense, I was a mental health professional in the way that especially leaders are peers and interested in the well-being of their soldiers. But yeah, I was coming back from Iraq in 2007, I think it was at this time. So October 2006 to December of 2007. And we were going through the reintegration process and that thing where, don't kick the dog and don't throw cans at the neighbors and stuff like that, right? Don't be goofballs. And in the class that we were at was a retired major, and she was the clinical director of our local veterans VA Vet Center. And so, just sort of as an aside, she said, if you're interested in psychology, you should really consider a career in the mental health field, because there are not enough combat veterans in the mental health field, and there are veterans out there that need the help. And so that was sort of a stone that was dropped into my mind. about the same time, the Veterans Court here in Veterans Trauma Court here in El Paso County in Colorado Springs was starting to stand up, and I saw that in the paper, and I'm like, those troops are really going to need to know, or need to have somebody who knows where they're coming from, right? That knows the smell of the blood and the dirt and all that other stuff. And so those two things together, I think, happened within a year of each other, and it really kind of solidified my desire to go down the path. And really, it's a way to continue my service. I just don't have to jump out of airplanes anymore.
Well, I think it is a huge difference from jumping out of airplanes. And you mentioned that being that you're a combat veteran, do you find that because you're a combat veteran and have had those experiences on the field, in the heat of battle, that people who are coming to you feel more that they're able to share the things that are hidden within their souls, or that the secrets that they're keeping, that they're making them sick? Do you find that they find you, that they can speak to you about these things that are haunting them?
Yeah, I mean, and for a couple of different reasons. One, a veteran doesn't need a very good reason to avoid therapy, right? Any reason is a good reason, right? So if I can say I don't want to go to therapy because this person doesn't know combat, then they're going to do it. So it removes one of those excuses, let's say. Yeah. Also, it's not something that we do a lot, right? We can kick in doors in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the hardest door that I've seen veterans try to get through is the closed door into my office, because they don't know what's on the other side. They may not know what's on the other side of the door in Iraq and Afghanistan, but they know that they can handle that. On the other side of my door, they're not certain, but they walk in my office, and it looks like a retired first sergeant's office, right? I got maps on the walls, and I got coins on the table. So immediately they can say, okay, this person understands, this person gets it, right? And so there's that sort of psychological, so all of these barriers are kind of dropping. And then it's a matter of the fact, a lot of veterans, they want to hold in what they're talking, because they don't want to reveal it to themselves, but they also have concern that they don't want to hurt other people. And sometimes if they feel they tell their traumatic stories, that they're going to hurt the person, that they're going to cause the person that they're telling distress, and they don't want to do that. Now, they know that I've been there, so they don't have to worry about distressing me, because I've already been through that. So those are three things that, little by little, it helps a veteran do that. However, you don't have to be a combat veteran to be able to do those things. I'm not saying, decorate your office, but a really good counselor or therapist who wants to work with veterans, they can develop that. Dr. Tick, right? He was not a veteran himself, and yet he was somebody who absolutely got to be one of the leading voices in the military. And so you don't have to be a veteran, much less a combat veteran. It does help. The other piece, though, is that sometimes a veteran will use my service as a reason to skip over their story, so that he's getting to a really hard place, and they'll be like, but you know what it was like, and so I'm going to jump over that piece. Well, I know what it was like for me, but I need to know what it was like for you.
Yeah. And I think that is, people can understand and listen to you. It's just like having a good therapist or counselor or coach. You got to be able to be willing to sit with the person and not be triggered by what's being spoken about. And for veterans out there, you've got to be able to trust the person that you're saying these things to. It's about someone who cares more about you and your health and your well-being, versus whatever that happens, to them. There's nothing going to impact them enough, because their love for you is going to surmount anything that you could possibly say to them. So getting over this stigma is such a huge thing for veterans. And you know what, I think our Vietnam veterans didn't show up until about 40 years later, after the war was done, and then our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans are hesitant to come in to see. Do you think that in the future we're going to be needing more people who are going to have to be able to see veterans because of the issues that they're not dealing with right now?
So there's a couple of things there, but yes, number one, there's not enough, there's a lack of mental health professionals in general in the United States, right? The demand is much greater than the supply for those of us who are in the mental health field. And yes, there is going to be an increasing demand. The current global war on terrorism combat cohort is the largest cohort of combat veterans since World War II. More post 9/11 veterans to deploy to combat than they did to Vietnam. And it's not a comparison. And yes, the current era veterans are only probably a quarter of the World War II veterans, but just the sheer size and number, and even the longevity of these conflicts. Not sure if your listeners know, but we're in the first cross-generational conflict in American history. Never has there been a conflict that has spanned 3 generations. If you think the generations of warriors at the beginning of these conflicts, the senior leaders in the Department of Defense, Peter Pace, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, was a platoon commander in Vietnam. So we've got Vietnam-era veterans that are leading the military 30, 40 years later. Then you have my generation. My son was born 1 month before 9/11. He could go enlist in the military, get the same job I had, go deploy to the same place I had, and potentially get into a battle in the same location I did. That's never happened, and that is a longevity issue. And unfortunately, I think, how they say the oldest living World War II veteran, I think the oldest living global war on terror veteran probably has not joined the military yet.
That's incredible. I didn't know that. That's really, I didn't realize that it was such a huge cross-section of our veteran community that were involved in this. That's some new information for me. But there is something that is universal for all veterans whenever they're coming back from war, is that not all of them, there's some that don't, but there's a lot that are challenged by the return. And they're trying to figure out how to fit into a world that maybe doesn't make sense to them anymore. And you have in your book here, you have a wonderful quote in one of the articles. You write, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened," which was Michel de Montaigne. I love him. It's fantastic. But veterans come back and we're carrying burdens, and burdens from maybe the things that we saw, maybe the things that we did, or the guilt or shame that we may feel, or unprocessed emotions, rage, whatever it may be, and we're carrying those burdens, and it can be a weight, it can be crushing, it can be paralyzing, and that weight of the past. And all of a sudden now it feels like you can't get that weight off. And now you dread the future because you've been so conditioned to think about the worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that could possibly happen here? Dwayne, why do we do this as veterans, and what is actually going on inside of our brains when we're doing this?
So it's actually, it's good that you said that it actually is in our brains. I once told a veteran, I said, it's all in your head. And he was like, but it's all in your brain. Like literally, our brains are adapting to this. And what's happening is when we join the military, regardless of which branch we came into, regardless of whether we went through, Beast Barracks or Hell Week in one of the service academies, or we got into a basic training, we were acculturized into a different culture. Everything that makes up a culture, a definition of a culture, we wear different clothes, we speak different languages. I speak both expletive and acronym fluently, right? So we speak differently. We translate knowledge differently. And so we act, I describe it as if I went to go live in Ireland for 22 years. Yeah, we maybe speak English, but it's a totally different culture. Now I have to come back and live in a location that I really don't understand. So just the fact that you're in military service causes us to think differently, and causes us to experience a different culture. So now we get out of the military, regardless of all the other stuff that's in our rucksack, we think differently. We have different experiences. Veterans and their families, because they travel with them, have much more global experiences. A lot of my family, I've got a large number of cousins, most of them live within 90 miles of where we grew up. And they don't travel. We don't tend to leave locations very much. But by the time I was 21, I'd been to more countries than I'd been to states. And so it's one of those things where when we leave the military, we have a different mindset, but we don't have the same kind of transformative experience leaving the military that we did coming in. So we're acculturized on the way in, but we are not acculturized into this new place on the way out. And we don't really fit anywhere. So we learned this one thing called a soldier service member, what have you. Now we're not a civilian. We're this weird mix between the two that's called a veteran. So even that can be challenging. And there's a number of different things, the different mindsets that apply. And then on top of that, you place the challenges, the painful knees and the backs and stuff like that, but also the soul wounds and the burdens that we have, that now that we're out, we're not around people that understand us anymore, and we don't even really understand what's going on ourselves. And so a lot of it compounds, and it's exponential, and it can really cause a burden for a lot of individuals.
Well, and it does, and I know it from my own experience, you know, the burdens that I carried for some of the work that I did, I felt a profound sense of guilt and couldn't allow myself to even forgive myself for some of the things that I did. And so it's so important to recognize that, you know, there's nothing wrong with us. We're okay. We just got to be able to talk to someone to unburden ourselves, to unpack our rucksack a little bit and help to carry so that we can get a clear idea about what's actually happening and what's going on within us. And we're as veterans, we tend to think negatively a lot of times. Is negative thinking something that we are just born to do, or is there a way we can start to break that negative thinking? Because that negative thinking can lead to a lot of the things that we're about to talk about here in just a moment. But if we could do some kind of preventative measures, I think we could help a lot of veterans right now who are trying to figure out, you know, what's going on inside of me.
Well, sure, and the negative thinking can lead to that, but the problem is in the military, the negative thinking was actually protective, right? You know, if we're in combat, we need to think about the enemy's most dangerous course of action in the future, the most catastrophic event I can think of, and then I need to prepare for it, right? That's why we have 3 T4s and a Claymore in the back of our truck. And so we get into that mindset so that it helps us, and it makes us prepared, and it keeps us alive, and it helps us bring our troops home. And so back then it was good, but now you tell me it was bad? Because you told me it was good. And so there's a confusion there. There's a paradox that we need to help veterans resolve, is to say, even with emotions, anger is appropriate in combat. Fear, of course, it's okay. And so those emotions that may be maladaptive in a different environment, they're acceptable. Although those emotions over here, right, the concern for others and the easygoingness and the sense of peace, those are actually dangerous when we're in combat.
That's true.
Now we go back to the civilian world, and so all that caring for my wife and concern for other people, I'm not used to doing that. But now the anger and the fear is no longer acceptable. And so there's this switch that we have to make to go back and forth. But then it's a matter of, like you said, how do we do it? One, recognize that the negative way that we see the world, the way that we think and talk, especially about ourselves, you talk about the guilt that you bear for what you were experiencing, the negative things we say about ourselves, they may have, maybe not entirely, but they may have been helpful then, but we need to recognize that they're not helpful now. It was good then, it's not good now. How do I change it? First, I have to be aware of it. I have to capture those thoughts. I have to recognize what they're saying. Then I need to consciously take action to change it. Because I can be aware of something all day long, and I can say, you know what? I kind of like being a jerk. I don't want to change. Well, then you're not going to change because you're not going to take action. So action, awareness plus action is what's going to lead to change.
And that was so true. It took me a long time to recognize the negative thinking that I had gotten into, and that I was recycling the same thoughts over and over again every day. And it was just, I was suffering more from my thoughts and the things that I was thinking, rather than from the events that actually happened back then when they did happen. Not to say they weren't traumatic, they were, but my thinking about it made it worse, and it made it cycle down, and it kept going into a very ugly place. And it wasn't until I became aware that I was doing that I was doing this to myself, that I was inflicting it on myself, that I started to say, wait, I don't have to stay stuck here. I can start to change the way I'm thinking, and I can take some actions to start doing that. And every time I feel that impulse not to do something, or I'm going to sabotage myself, or I'm going into that depressive state, Let me do something else. Let me think of what is something good. Let me realize what a gift it is to wake up today and breathe. Let me think. Even if it was just one little action like that, it made all the difference. Now, we are talking suicide here as well, and it is a major issue among our veteran community. And you've been doing the podcast of Seeking the Military Suicide Solution. As you know, post-military life can lead to a lot of challenges mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. If we lose track of meaning and purpose, we can slip into that hopelessness and depression. I know this, yes. And the combination of these two is especially hopelessness. When you have no more hope, you are at a much greater risk for suicide. What are some preventative steps that we can do so that we don't get into the trap of hopelessness, Dwayne?
Well, again, one of the first things is to really sort of be aware that there's the potential for that. You know, I often, one of the books that I often refer to my clients is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, right? And I read Man's Search for Meaning before I deployed to combat, and then I read it after I deployed to combat, and I read it in a totally different way. But one of the things that Frankl says in that book is he could tell when one of his fellow inmates was finally going to die very soon, because they would start smoking their own cigarettes, because in the camps the cigarettes were a form of currency, right? But once they started smoking their own cigarettes, he could tell that they had no intention of living beyond the time that once I run out of these cigarettes, the hope was gone. They didn't have a hope of being able to continue to barter with these cigarettes. And so it's this idea of saying, even if we're in the most difficult of circumstances, we can still find meaning. And that's all of what Man's Search for Meaning is finding meaning in suffering, noble meaning. But recognizing that as we're suffering, and that's worth a discussion of pain is pain, but we know pain's going to end. Suffering is pain that we don't see ending. See, suicide is really an attempt to stop suffering. Mm-hmm. Physical suffering, emotional suffering, psychological suffering, spiritual suffering with guilt if I feel things, right? And so in many different ways that it's a way for us to stop the suffering that we're in. And if we don't have the hope of the suffering ending, either through our efforts or the efforts of other people, mm-hmm. then we believe that might be the case. And it usually isn't, right? So we usually view long-lasting pain that hasn't changed as suffering and assume that we're always going to be suffering, but we're not. We have to understand that there are certain things that I can do to ease my suffering, or go to others and have them help me ease it for me.
Well, and that's true. One of the reasons that when I was on the board of suicidal ideation is that I just wanted the pain to stop. I mean, that was like one of the biggest things. Is I didn't know how else to end. I didn't know how else to stop it. Right. And it was like, this is the only way I can do it, because it was so excruciating. It was the most excruciating, unendurable pain I'd ever been in my whole life, and it wouldn't leave me. It would never go away. And it was followed. It was haunted. It was miserable, absolutely. And it was just like, oh my gosh. And I didn't have a support. I didn't have the social community and everything that you talk about in your book here. It's so on point. But there are a lot of misconceptions about suicide in the military-affiliated population. Could you address some of these, Dwayne, some of the common misconceptions about suicide that people may not know of about our military population?
Yeah, and so some of these are really myths about suicide that people have in general. One of them is people think that if I feel like somebody is contemplating suicide, they haven't said it, I got the sense, there's a gut feeling, they may or may not be, but if I say it, I may be planting the thought in their head, right? So that would cause somebody to say, well, I don't want to say the word, because by saying the word, it might make them do the deed. Mm-hmm. They're already thinking about it. Even if they're not thinking about it specifically, if you have that gut instinct, they are already thinking about it. So that's one of the myths of suicide, is that if I reach out and I say, hey brother, hey sister, are you thinking of taking your own life? Are you thinking of killing yourself? that I don't want to do that if I think that's going to harm the other person. It's actually not the case. It's actually more likely, research shows that actually reaching out and talking about it specifically is going to have them open up, because what we all really want to do, what you wanted to do at that time, was for people to understand what was happening. And so we need to be heard, we need to be listened to. Another common myth is one that is around methods of suicide. And so especially in the military and veteran population, firearms far and away are the most used method of lethal means. Poisoning, overdoses, there are more attempts, but there's less lethality. With firearms, there's less attempts, but obviously there's more lethality because of the method. Some people think that if I intervene with one method, and somebody who's really wants to take their own life, they're just going to jump to another method. Also, research shows that that's not the case. That isn't the way it works. It seems to be that an individual has a way that they're considering, a preferred method, if you want to describe it like that. And if you interrupt their access, or if you help them more specifically interrupt the access to that method, then they're not going to switch over to another type of method. Then it's actually putting time and space in between that. And so this is another thing that we don't do, as much as, not just me, but many of us in this space think that we have to have conversations around lethal means safety, firearms, prescription medications, and suicide hotspots, because suicide happens in a very confined space, right? Especially if somebody is in that very critical crisis. We can be on a continuum for a period of time, but that moment of crisis really lasts a matter of hours, if not minutes. And so if we can put time between that seemingly overwhelming urge for someone and then the access to their method, chances are that time is going to pass, and then they'll be able to get the help. So I think those are two of the biggest ones that I have heard that have caused people to not really want to have the conversations about it.
Well, that makes sense. And I, I've heard, and when I was doing some of my training, one of the things that they trained us, and I think it was, I can't remember but it was, you wanted, if somebody was about to commit suicide, you wanted to address it. Are you thinking about taking your life? Are you thinking about suicide? I mean, it was about bringing it out so that it wasn't hidden. You didn't tiptoe around it because they're already thinking about it anyway. I was already kind of thinking about it anyway when I was at that time. I mean, and so, it was something that needed to kind of come out of me, but I needed someone to be able to not be afraid to talk to me about these things. I mean, that's for me, that's what I needed at that time. And you describe in your book such a beautiful way, maybe it's not beautiful, but it's an accurate way of what suicide is, that it happens on a continuum. Could you explain that to our audience, what that continuum is, and so that people can know and identify it in themselves or somebody else that may be considering it?
Sure, and sometimes, usually this comes with slides and a whiteboard, right? But if your listeners can sort of visualize, is really we have to change how we think and even how we talk about suicide. And as an aside, and not a knock on you, but many people use the phrase committing suicide. But really there's an attempt to try to change the language around that, because committing something is we're committing a crime. We commit murder, but really we need to look at someone dying by suicide. Commitment is something that we're committed to a cause. Whereas if we change the way, and again, it's not a knock on it, but it's how we're using this language around it. And another type of changing the way that we're thinking about it really is about suicide is not an on or off proposition. It's not that you're either suicidal or you're not. It is not binary. And so really we have three different stages and a couple of steps in each stage. So first you have sort of a contemplation type stage where you have ideations, right? So first you have vague ideations where you're not thinking specifically of, I'm going to take my own life. It's more things like, maybe it would just be easier if I wasn't here. I wish I wouldn't wake up tomorrow. Some of these just vague, those thoughts are starting to creep in. And then you go into these specific ideations. I could really take my own life. I could really kill myself. I want to die. So there the difference is just sort of, vaguely talking about it versus using the actual words of death, kill, and die. Then when you move from ideation and then you start thinking about the behaviors, once you start thinking specifically about not just whether I want to do it, but that I'm going to do it and how I'm going to do it, how I'm going to gather the methods, how I'm going to actually, thinking about taking my car up off of Gold Camp Road here in Colorado Springs, or I've got the knives in the other room, or what have you, right? So moving beyond the can I do it or should I do it to the how will I do it, and then you actually start gathering materials to put that in place, right? I start putting, I have a friend of mine, and this can be kind of graphic for some of your listeners, and so if this is a concern for them, I have some concern about that. But I have a friend, Green Beret, who said that he used to walk around the house with a 45 round in his hand, just tossing it up and down, telling himself, is this the night that I'm going to have the courage to put it in my gun? That's suicidal behavior, right? That's moving beyond just the thought to, I'm actually engaging in certain behaviors, and then you have an attempt, putting those behaviors into action, and then you actually have the act of suicide. So really you have this long continuum, but if we can catch it in the top end, or someone can help us catch it for us, if we can throw somebody a lifeline when they're farther upstream, when they're having these conversations, because a lot of times people don't say, hey, I'm drowning, until they're at the far end. If we can start to move this conversation that if you're having thoughts of death, kill, and die, you're not at the edge of the cliff yet where we're not going to put you in a hospital. We need to talk about this so we can stop it now and get you back to safer ground. Because if it does get to the point where you're almost at the edge, well, then we have to take different measures.
Well, and when you were elucidating some of the things that your thoughts and those ideas, and it's exactly what the process where I was just like, it would be better I wasn't around, and then how would I do it, and boy, I could drive it right off this cliff, and so those are the thoughts that I was having, and boy, if we could catch it before that, and you recognize that, and you see that, and you feel like you're telling it, that's an indication, a signal right there. Call somebody, reach out to Dwayne, talk to somebody who can help you to get over this, because all you're needing is someone to hear your truth, someone to see your soul, someone to hear your story and not flinch, someone who's going to be able to say, my gosh, I'm here with you, and I'm going to stand right beside you, and I'm not going to let you go. I mean, that's what we're calling, that's what we're crying out for. And there's a lot that people are trying to do to address suicide in the military, with service members, with veterans, and their families. Dwayne, in your opinion, why do you think that the numbers continue to rise?
Well, I think a lot of it is that there seems to be a lot of resources, but then there's also a gap between those that need to use that resources. There's still a ton of stigma around mental health, and here we're talking about just the U.S. in general. And let me put it this way, not even just the U.S. I've had guests on my show, Sue Freeth from the U.K. about combat stress, Barry Swartstein from Australia talking about Australian veterans. I mean, so this isn't just a U.S. veteran problem, even more than it's a U.S. problem. This is a global situation that we need to address. But there is a lot of stigma around seeking the support. Once we do get the support, we keep telling everybody, knock on our door, but when somebody knocks on our door, we have to be ready to respond, so we have to answer the door. So making sure that that individual has the right kind of care, but really it's an understanding around this. See, suicide is a lagging indicator of an underlying problem. Suicide is not the problem that needs to be solved, it's just the end result of some other underlying problem. Less than or approximately 50% of veteran suicides have or met the criteria for a psychological diagnosis. Other times it's financial issues, it's relationship issues, it's belongingness issues. It's not the fact that they have a diagnosable mental health condition, it's the fact that they can't get their needs met, that they're homeless or things like that. And so really, the problem is it's so complicated that we're all looking for this one solution. That's why the name of the podcast is a misnomer. There is no solution. no single solution for the problem of service member, veteran, military, family suicide. Really, it's a matter of, we don't need, here's a hamburger, we need the whole buffet. We need to have, if you want pizza, you go get pizza. You want lobster, go get lobster. You need steak, you go get steak. And so we have a wide range of interventions for whatever that individual is experiencing or causing their suffering, that they're able to get that.
And I think that's so important for people to know, is that there's a wide variety. There's no one solution to why somebody is on the edge of suicide. I mean, there's so many multiple factors, and a lot of times it's individual. A lot of times it's their personal experience. It's early traumatic memories that have been unprocessed or undigested. It could be adverse childhood experiences. It could be the experiences that they had in the military. It could be dysfunctional relationships. It could, so many things. And
so you describe veterans right there.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And so one of the key factors that I think in helping people is letting people know that there's resources out there, and to not be hesitate to reach out to people who are willing and ready and want to help you, to understand what's going on, to value and cherish your life, that your life is worth living, that you're precious to this planet, that you're precious to life. And I think you wanted to say something. Looked like you wanted to say something, Dwayne.
Yeah, and exactly that. And unfortunately, we do want people to reach out, but we want them to reach out at a time when they're least likely to reach out, or they have the least capability of reaching out. So this is something else that really we talked about on my show, is that we need to get away from this passive resource offering, call me if you need me, right? This resource is here on the shelf somewhere, so you can come get it off the shelf when you need it, when really we need to be more active, proactive, in reaching out to individuals and say, hey, you look like you're suffering, and how do I help you alleviate that? We don't have to use those words. But understanding that all of these other factors, veteran homelessness, veteran unemployment, a lack of purpose and meaning, all of these different things that cause this guilt, if someone is doing that, if someone is doing excellent work in veteran homelessness, they're preventing suicide. The person that brought me coffee this morning, the barista at my local coffee shop, they're preventing suicide. Suicide prevention is everyone's job, and if we can help everyone be better, even to the point of knowing if someone's going through foreclosure, right? If I'm a bank loan officer and I can see that I'm about to foreclose on this VA loan, hey, this individual might also be at risk for suicide. So how can I reach out or have somebody reach out and give them these resources? So really giving, yes, we absolutely want to have the resources there for somebody to reach out and get it, but also we need to be proactive and be able to provide active resource delivery.
Well, and I think that's a great point. You're absolutely right. And being much more active and not allowing ourselves just to say, yeah, we've got the resources here, but really being able to reach out. And we don't know, Dwayne, how the little kindnesses that we do every day, how important that is. A smile, like you were saying, the barista every morning giving you the coffee, and going out and saying, how are you doing, what's going on, being interested and showing people that you care, and that you empathize with them, and that you give a shit. I think that's one of the biggest things, is that people want to know that you care. But you've got to do it. It's got to be action. It can't be just words. You got to do it too. You got to walk the talk. And a lot of times we forget that sometimes. But that's why we have conversations like this on these different media platforms, to help to get the word out, to expand the knowledge, to inform and educate people. And I love this very unique non-traditional media that we have here, and you're doing the same thing with your podcast and trying to inform and educate. Why do you think, Dwayne, it's important to use these non-traditional media to spread the word about suicide prevention, doing the things that you're doing on your blog and your podcast?
And this is something, I love research articles. I was in college for 10 years, from my associates to my master's degrees. But research articles, all the theoretical stuff, that's written for other people who read research articles. I don't know about you, but I don't get up in the morning saying I need to check out the latest research article. But I do open my local paper every day, or I do, however I consume information. And so avoiding, again, if we talk about non-traditional channels, avoiding having these conversations on Twitter, on Facebook, and it is happening, on Facebook, but not having these conversations. I actually had somebody one time say, you're never going to reach veterans because they're not talking about mental health on social media online. And I'm like, have you seen Facebook lately? Because they're sure talking a lot about there. And so we need to be, this is something we talk about in the clinical communities, we need to be able to meet veterans where they're at. And yes, as you mentioned, I've had the honor of having some really neat opportunities. Actually, what just recently happened is that Hasbro, G.I. Joe, right? So kid of the 80s like me, G.I. Joe was the thing. And so they actually relaunched a different version of the G.I. Joe universe. But just here on August 19th, they released an issue. I was able to consult on it, in which it was actually addressing the psychological impact of combat. And one of the G.I. Joe characters, so Duke, Duke and Scarlet, the two leaders of the G.I. Joe team, Duke is actually conducting an intervention with Scarlet because she's having a hard time coming back from combat. And it goes through, 18 months of her treatment journey, and she says the treatment's BS. I don't want to go into it. And she has setbacks, and she has flashbacks, and then finally at the end, she's like, "I'm in a better place." But it's a comic book, right? I mean, and it's a different way to get a different message out there. And once these conversations start to hit the mainstream, it's happening on TV, it's happening in the movies, it's happening in comic books, and that's how we start to really, it's again, like the 80s. Once we started talking about HIV as an everyone problem, we got our hands around it, and so it's no longer the secret thing that's in the back. And so I think these ways, what you're doing here, obviously what Dr. Tick has been doing for many years, getting the message out in as many different ways as we can get it out, people are starting to talk about it.
I agree, and it's just informing people, letting them know that you can take control of your life. You can surround yourself with people who care, and just by being able to immerse yourself in these dialogues with people, you learn, you grow, and you educate yourself in ways that you didn't know before. And I think it's great because people can come back to it. They don't have to watch it or listen to it right away. They can come back to it, and I think they get. That's one of the things I love about new media is that I can say, well, I couldn't watch it today, but I can watch it tomorrow, or I can listen to the podcast, and I can listen on my own at a different time. So I think the spread of this media is so much larger than we understand, that we can affect people and touch people, 2 years, 3 or 4 years, 5 years down the line. And so that's why I think it's so powerful. And especially when we're dealing with suicide, and like this series is dedicated to veterans and their families. And, when we were talking before we started the show, the idea is to hit that advice to someone who's listening right now, who's watching this, who's listening to it today, tomorrow, a year from now, and who might be on the brink. Another veteran brother, another veteran sister, who might be on the edge. Dwayne, what could we say? What could you say? What do we want them to know that they can do right now?
And it's interesting, and you alluded to it a little bit before, but especially so we've conducted 50 interviews for the suicide-specific podcast, and one of the main things is we just need to stop being jerks to each other. Because if we stop being jerks to each other, a lot of this stuff is going to be resolved. But that's really it, is to understand that as much as we might be individually hurting, other people could be hurting too. And so on the one hand, for those individuals, and you're absolutely right, there's this one person who could be listening to this a year and a half, 2.5, 3 years from now. That's what we're doing with the Seeking the Military Suicide Solution. It's not just for today, but we're hoping that 5 years from now, somebody's going to get into this series and say, man, this is some good stuff, how do I apply it? And it really boils down to putting your hand on somebody's shoulder, looking them in the eye and say, hey, I give a crap. Yeah. How can I help you? Right? What can I do for you? How are you suffering? And you're not going to do that to a complete stranger. You could, absolutely. I mean, this is and not a veteran story, but Kevin Hines, who is a well-known suicide survivor speaker, he talks about how his story. He was going to go throw himself off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he actually did and lived, which was part of the story. But he said, if one person would have reached out to me that day, I was crying on the public transportation. If one person would have said, hey, what's going on? He said, I would have told him, and I likely wouldn't have done what I did, right? So for the one thing is if you see someone suffering or sense someone suffering, especially a veteran, a brother and sister, put your hand on your shoulder, look them in the eye and say, I don't want you to die today. Yeah. What can I do to keep that from happening? On the other side, if someone is in the middle of that dark place, recognize that you're not alone. You're not alone in this. This is a colleague on the previous podcast, Dr. Phil Smith, University of South Alabama. He said suicide is both common and rare. It's common in that all of us have been affected by it in one way, shape, or form, either personally or if we lost someone close. So it's extremely common. Suicide has impacted everyone. But it's such a rare event that many of us can go years without it affecting us, right? So anyone around you has probably experienced something that has to do with this. So if you're suffering, recognize that you're not alone. And like you said, if nobody's reaching out to offer you that help, reach out and get that help yourself. And there's things like the Veteran Crisis Line, veteranCrisisLine.net. There's a number of different ways to talk to people. Every state now likely has a suicide prevention hotline. There's a great program called Vets for Warriors, retired General Mark Graham out of New Jersey, which is not a crisis line, but it's a support line staffed by veterans for veterans. There's so much resources out there that if you find yourself in a dark place, if you find yourself suffering, you hear this, know that you're not alone, and that someone out there that can help you alleviate that suffering, and you just got to keep looking for them until you find it.
And it's finding those resources, like the veteran. What was the veteran suicide hotline? Isn't that available?
Yeah.
If you could let people know what that is quickly.
Sure. So the Veteran Crisis Line, it's at veteranCrisisLine.net, and the number is 1-800-273-8255. Press 1 for military and veterans. And that is a crisis line that is ran by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mm-hmm. It's not just for VA-eligible veterans. It's for all veterans, all service members, National Guard, Reserve, and their families. That is the National Veterans Crisis Line. But you can also find them at veteranCrisisLine.net. They have a text function. They have a chat function. They might have a carrier pigeon function. They want to help you. All you got to do is reach out.
Thank you. And I think that's such an important, just reach out if you need it and get the support. It took me such a long time, Dwayne, to get to a place where I could really be satisfied with life. Satisfied with my own life, to come from the edge of that, and I try to, let people know that you can come back, that this is not a permanent situation. At the time, I thought it was. At the time, I thought, gosh, I didn't think I'd get out of the darkness. I just didn't. I didn't think I would be here sitting with you, but I am. And so, yes, you can come back from the brink. And this was a tough topic when we were framing this series because it's so personal. And in your book you say something that really touched me and really I think is really important. You say, you don't climb a mountain by saying you wish you could. And I thought it was such a truthful statement. When I was at that brink, I had the awareness that I was in trouble, and that I needed to do something about it. And so that was that self-awareness that you were talking about. And if I would have kept going down that path without having that self-awareness, I wouldn't be sitting here. And so it's understanding that at that moment, I was made the determination, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get out through this. I'm going to do whatever, I don't care what it takes, what it costs me. I'm going to climb up to the top of this mountain. And that was the action that I had to take. Can we affect change without the action? And how, Dwayne, can we find faith in ourselves again when maybe we've lost faith?
Well, one of the things that I tell veterans is we have endured much, and that proves that we can endure more, right? And it doesn't mean we need to endure suffering. This treatment, it's not because, say, I'm 10 steps below zero. This isn't a way for me to get to zero, because that's just a life with the absence of suffering. Like you, we need to choose life, and we need to build a life worth living. So it's not get up to zero, we need to get above zero, and we need to find a life of whatever kind of abundance that we talk about. But then, just like, especially veterans and service members, to share that abundance with other people, because that's what we are, that's what we do, is we want to help others. That's really the drive. I make the joke about not living in my dad's basement, but that was really it, I wanted to serve, right? And I found that the service was a really strong thing for me. So we can't serve others if we're down in the pit. So we need to climb the mountain, build a life worth living, and then turn around and help others up the hill.
Absolutely. And that was one of the biggest motivators too for me, was to be in service, was to take whatever lessons that I had gained from this experience and to be able to translate that in a way that would be able to help others to climb the mountain themselves, to come from that edge and to reach in deep inside of them, to know that there's something deep inside of them that can carry them forward through any challenge, through any circumstance, through any crisis that they may be in, through any trauma that they may have experienced, anything that would have tested their will and their soul, that they can come through it. And no, it's not easy, and that's why you got to reach out to the people and help them out. And when you've crossed that bridge, you got to reach back and say, "Here, I'm here to serve you." And to be in service, I think, is such an important thing for veterans, because that we've got to serve a higher cause. It's just part of our makeup. It's part of why we heard the call to be service members in the first place, was because we heard that higher call. I can't believe we're at 2:00.
Usually happens.
It does. We're in these. I don't want it to end the conversation. I want to have you back on again for sure, Dwayne. And folks, we are doing this Veterans Summit special series here on the council, here at KUHS TV Radio. It is in partnership with the Trauma Sensitive Awareness Foundation. This is part 1. And it's a special 10-part series filled with information, hope, inspiration, and healing. We're exploring cutting-edge treatments and alternative therapies, hearing pioneering veterans and mental injury experts. We are finding hope for PTS, TBI, moral injury, sleep disturbance, family conflict, emotional trauma, and so much more. Part 2 debuts in November at www.t-saf.org. That's t-saf.org. And we're broadcasting here live at KUHSdenver.com. Thank you, Henry, and everybody here at KUHS The Stream. We are broadcasting from Denver, all across the nation, all around the world, and best music, best DJs, personalities, interviews. I mean, we have some of the best people working here. Tune in to KUHSdenver.com. Dwayne, thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an honor and a privilege to meet you, sir, and to have you on the show. You are filled with wisdom and inspiration, strength and courage. Again, your website is Veteran Health. Where is it? It's veteranmentalhealth.com. Dwayne, I always ask my guests before we close out the show if they could give one bit of advice, one bit of wisdom from their life experience, what would it be?
In the way I look at it, and hopefully this is a phrase or a concept that veterans can latch onto, anyone can latch onto. As long as I have breath in my lungs, I have hope in my heart. And as long as I have hope in my heart, I'm going to live to see another day.
That's great. It's really great. And that is so true, having that hope in your heart. When you can find hope in that breath, in that moment, in that experience of your life, life slowly becomes more and more enjoyable, and your life becomes worth living, and your life is worth living. Folks, thank you so much for tuning into the council. The council is adjourned. We will be back next Saturday. We are coming on Saturday, September 5th, for our next show Folks, may you all be well. May you all be free of pain and suffering. May you all be whole. God bless. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.